The echo of my crutches against the polished wooden floor was louder than any gavel could ever strike. Each step sent a sharp jolt up my broken leg pain, pulsing through my ribs, but I welcomed it. The pain reminded me I was alive, standing, breathing, moving forward when the whole world had been told I was gone. My crutches clicked with a rhythm that drew every gaze in the courtroom. Conversations stilled whispers died mid-sentence, and even the jury leaned forward. At the plaintiff's table, Danielle Brooks sat poised, her navy suit immaculate, her hair sculpted into perfection, her face lit with smug control. She thought today was hers. She thought her lies had won. She had no idea what was walking toward her. Her eyes lifted, and the moment they met mine, the blood drained from her face. She froze, lips trembling, then released a scream so raw it made every head in the room whip toward her. The scream wasn't human. It was the sound of a mask tearing of a predator caught in her own trap. Papers slid from her hands, fluttering like broken wings before scattering across the floor. She stumbled back. Her chair screeched, and she collapsed sideways, knocking into her attorney, who barely caught her before she hit the ground. Gasps rippled across the room. A woman in the front row covered her mouth. A juror dropped his pen with a clatter. Even the judge paused. Gavel raised mid-air, his eyes wide before pounding for order. The bailiff rushed forward, but no one could stop the silence that followed her scream. I stood at the center of it, my shoulders squared, my crutches gripped tight, my breath steady. The bruises beneath my clothes burned with memory, but I let the pain fuel me. Danielle writhed in her seat, her chest heaving, her perfectly crafted world unraveling in front of the very people she had fooled. My attorney Mark Bennett stepped forward, and his calm voice cut through the tension like a blade. "This is my client, Natalie Brooks. She is alive." "Alive!" The word cracked through the courtroom louder than the judge's gavel, sharper than her scream. The jury gasped. Danielle's attorney fumbled, and the spectators erupted into murmurs that swelled into disbelief. Danielle shook her head violently, her manicured nails clawing at the edge of the table as though the wood could anchor her from sinking. She had declared me dead. She had forged papers, manipulated the system, and silenced every whisper of doubt. But here I was, standing, breathing, staring her down. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady in my chest, sharp as a blade. She thought she buried me, but today I bury her lies. The air shifted. The murmurs cut off. Danielle's eyes widened in terror, her collapse no longer a performance of faintness, but the visible crumbling of a woman who knew the game was over. I tightened my grip on the crutches and took another step forward. The reckoning had only begun. I was born into a house where love was measured out in pieces, and every piece went to my sister Danielle. From the moment she took her first breath, she was the golden child, the one my parents spoke of with pride and certainty, the one whose smile could melt their tempers and whose achievements decorated the walls like trophies. My name, Natalie Brooks, was rarely spoken with the same admiration. I was the afterthought the shadow meant to adjust, to bend, to obey. Danielle ruled not just through charm, but through cruelty sharpened in small acts that cut deeper than any blade. When we were children, she would snatch my toys and parade them as hers, and if I dared protest, she would spin a lie so smooth my parents believed I had gifted them to her willingly. She would tear the pages out of my favorite books, then shrug with wide, innocent eyes and say I had done it myself in a tantrum. She whispered lies into my parents' ears that left me punished and ashamed, while she stood close by with a smile that promised she would always win. As we grew older, her cruelty matured into a weapon of control. She mocked my choices, belittled my dreams, and cast shadows on every friendship I tried to nurture. When I saved up for a hairstyle I liked, she laughed in front of relatives and told me it made me look desperate. When I paid my bills on time, she dropped sly comments to my parents about how irresponsible I was with money. When I dared to bring a boy home, she found flaws in him, whispered them into my parents' ears until they sat me down with stern faces and insisted I let him go. If I resisted, Danielle's silence came sharp and cold, a punishment that stretched for weeks, a void so deep that my parents begged me to apologize to her as though she were the sun and I merely one of its planets forced to orbit. I learned early that resistance meant isolation, so I shrank myself down, spoke less. Asked for little made my life as invisible as possible. But invisibility came with a cost. I lost the sense that I had any right to make decisions for myself. Every day was a careful dance around her moods, a survival built on appeasement. My parents, blinded by their faith in Danielle, never questioned her power, never wondered why their younger daughter moved like a ghost through her own life. In their eyes, Danielle was the glue that held the family together. The brilliant daughter who managed their finances, organized their appointments, reminded them of every responsibility, while I was the one they worried over, the fragile one, the one they believed incapable of standing on her own. What they never saw was that Danielle thrived on that image. The more dependent everyone was on her, the more power she wielded, and I, trapped in her orbit, had no escape. By the time I reached my 20s, I lived in quiet compliance. My victories so small they barely felt like victories at all. A pair of thrift store shoes Danielle would never wear. A book borrowed from the library she could not mock because she had no idea I had it. A night spent with Jenna, my only true friend from high school, though even Jenna eventually grew tired of Danielle's constant interference and drifted away. These scraps of independence were all I had. I told myself they were enough, but deep down I knew I was suffocating in a cage built from her control. I remember one Thanksgiving when I brought a simple pumpkin pie I had baked myself. Danielle laughed in front of the entire family, announced it looked like something scraped from the floor, and within minutes my parents were agreeing that perhaps I should have let Danielle handle the dessert. I smiled, swallowed the shame, and kept quiet, but inside I felt myself disappearing. That was my life, year after year, a cycle of dominance and submission, her victories stacked like bricks, my defeats piled like stones around my chest. Yet even in those years when hope seemed like a luxury I could not afford, I dreamed. Quiet, forbidden dreams that belonged only to me. Dreams of a little house with a garden, a dog waiting by the door, a life where no one dictated who I could love or how I should live. Those dreams lived in the tiny rebellion of a lottery ticket, bought each Saturday, tucked into my wallet like a secret flame. I never expected to win. I never expected those numbers to align. It was not about winning. It was about imagining for just a moment that my life could belong to me. And then, against all odds, it happened. One cold evening at a gas station, my crumpled ticket matched every number on the screen. $5 million. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears as I gripped the paper like it was the key to freedom. For the first time in my life, I held something Danielle could not touch, something she could not claim as hers, something that was wholly mine. And in that moment, I felt a crack in the walls of my cage. I did not yet know that the freedom I had dreamed of would awaken Danielle's darkest cruelty. I did not yet know that my sister, the golden child, the perfect daughter, would rather see me buried than see me free. The night I realized my life had changed forever, I sat alone in my small apartment staring at the winning numbers printed on a crumpled ticket that suddenly carried the weight of freedom in its ink. $5 million. The figure felt unreal, almost dangerous, as though speaking it aloud might cause it to vanish. I pressed the ticket to my chest, my heart hammering against it, and for the first time in my life, I imagined a future where Danielle could not touch me, where my parents' disapproving looks no longer dictated my every choice, where I could breathe without asking permission. The fantasy was intoxicating. I pictured resigning from my dull office job, walking out of the beige cubicle walls, forever buying a house with a porch bathed in sunlight, maybe even traveling without explaining myself to anyone. For a day and a half, I held the secret close, savoring it like a forbidden fruit, knowing Danielle's reach had not yet tainted it. But secrets in my family never lasted. By the second evening, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. "Family meeting tonight. Danielle says it is important." My stomach dropped. She knew. Of course she knew. She had an instinct for control, a sixth sense for anything I tried to keep from her. That night, my parents arrived with Danielle leading the charge, a leather-bound planner in her hands, as though this were a corporate takeover. My father sat stiffly on the couch, my mother perched beside him, both with expressions that told me they had been thoroughly briefed. Danielle began without preamble. I hear congratulations are in order. 5 million is a lot for one person, especially someone without experience. That is why we are here to help." Her tone carried no warmth, no sisterly pride, only the slick authority of someone who already believed the money was hers. She flipped open her planner pages filled with diagrams and notes. "The best option is to place the winnings into a family trust. Naturally, I will serve as trustee." My parents nodded as though the plan had been carved in stone. They added their own comments about stability and protection, parroting Danielle's words. My tea sat untouched, cooling on the table as I listened to her map out my future, as though I were not even in the room. At first, I said no calmly, then more firmly as she pressed her smile, thinning into a hard line. I told her I would hire my own financial advisor, that I would handle it myself. For a moment, the room froze. My father cleared his throat. My mother shifted uncomfortably. And then, Danielle's mask slipped. "You don't know what you are doing," she hissed, her voice low, eyes sharp as glass. "You'll burn through it in a year and come crawling back." I told her I would take that risk. Her gaze hardened, a glint I had only seen a few times in my life, always right before something terrible happened to me. She leaned forward, her words a blade pressed against my throat. "This money will not stay in your hands for long." My parents sat silent, their eyes sliding away, complicit in their stillness. Danielle snapped her planner shut and rose with a cold smile. "The meeting is over." They left without another word. I sat in the dim light, my heart pounding, the truth settling like ice in my chest. Danielle was not simply angry. She was enraged that I had broken the hierarchy, that for the first time I had said no. In her mind, I was still the lesser sibling, the one she could control, the one who existed only to serve her narrative. My independence was not just an insult to her. It was a threat. I should have seen it then. I should have known her warning was not an empty promise. But I wanted to believe my refusal would end it. I wanted to believe the nightmare of her control could finally be over. 7 days later, I signed the papers on a small house at the edge of town, a modest 2-bedroom with a fenced yard and a porch that caught the afternoon sun. I stood in the empty living room, sunlight spilling across the bare floors, and for the first time in my life, I felt the faint stirrings of ownership, of freedom. I locked the door behind me with a trembling hand, unaware that Danielle was already moving her pieces into place, preparing not for another conversation, but for an act of violence that would turn my fragile hope into a fight for survival. The night it happened, the air was damp with drizzle, and the streets shone slick under my headlights as I drove home from my new house, the deed and documents stacked neatly on the passenger seat, like proof that I had finally taken a step out of Danielle's shadow. The road was quiet, the kind of weekday silence where even the traffic lights seemed half asleep. I remember glancing at the folder beside me, the corner of the lottery claim form peeking out, and for the briefest moment, I allowed myself to smile. That was when the roar of an engine erupted behind me. In the rearview mirror, headlights swelled, blinding, barreling forward with a speed that made no sense on an empty, wet road. My heart stuttered. I gripped the wheel. The impact came like an explosion. Metal slammed into metal with a scream that shook my bones. My car lurched forward, tires skidding my chest, crushed against the seatbelt, my head snapping hard against the wheel. I tasted blood, sharp and metallic, filling my mouth. I tried to steady the car, but another hit slammed into the side, spinning me toward the guardrail. Glass shattered in white-hot bursts. The world tilted, spun, collapsed into chaos. I remember the smell of gasoline, acrid and thick, the hiss of the engine choking under the strain, my own hands clenched so tight around the wheel my knuckles burned. Pain tore through my leg like fire ribs, screaming with every breath. And then the world went black. When I woke, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the air reeked of antiseptic, and a mask covered my face, feeding me air that tasted like plastic. My vision swam, a nurse's face swaying into focus. "You are in the hospital. You were in a bad accident." My throat was dry, my voice a rasp. "How long?" 2 days, she said gently. "I asked for my family." The nurse hesitated, her eyes soft with pity. "We called. No one came." the words hit harder than the crash. No one came. Not my parents. Not Danielle. Not even a call. I told myself maybe they were shocked. Maybe they were processing, but as the hours turned into days, the truth began to rot inside me. They had left me alone. The doctor came with his list of injuries: multiple broken ribs, a compound fracture in my leg, a concussion that left my head pounding and my vision blurred. "You are lucky to be alive," he said, but I did not feel lucky. I felt discarded, forgotten, erased. Each morning I asked the nurses if anyone had called. Each time they shook their heads. One afternoon, Carla, a blunt night nurse with kind eyes, admitted that Danielle had come by but not to see me. She had gone straight to administration to request copies of my medical records and insurance details, urgent curt, uninterested in whether I was breathing or not. My chest tightened. Why would she want records, not me? I left voicemails, called my parents, left message after message. Nothing. Once my mother sent a text with 4 words. "Hope you are resting." Cold. Detached. It felt like a eulogy more than concern. Then the bills began to arrive. I reached for my debit card, but the transaction was declined. Confused, I called the bank. After endless transfers, a representative told me my accounts were frozen due to a legal inquiry. I had never missed a payment in my life. It made no sense. Panic crawled through me as I realized that everything I had built, fragile as it was slipping away. I was trapped in a hospital bed, tethered to machines, unable to fight back while the world outside dissolved. At night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling tiles, replaying the crash. The headlights behind me, the deliberate slam, the way the truck had not stopped but pushed, shoved, tried to grind me off the road. It had not been an accident. It had been an execution. The thought made bile rise in my throat, but every time I tried to voice it, the words stuck. Who would believe me? I was the weak one, the fragile one, the invisible sister. Danielle was the competent one, the golden child. The hospital became my entire world, each day bleeding into the next under the constant hum of medical equipment. My leg encased in a rigid brace, metal pins pressing under skin that throbbed each time I shifted. Breathing hurt every inhale, tugging at fractured ribs. The concussion left me disoriented, floating between dreams and reality. The loneliness was worse than the pain. Nurses became my only companions, slipping into my room with soft voices and small kindnesses. One night, Carla mentioned casually that she had seen Danielle in the hospital again, not in my room, but in the hallway talking to administration, her heels clicking with urgency, her words sharp as she demanded full access to my file. Carla thought it strange. Most sisters asked about the patient. Danielle asked only for paperwork. Then, Jenna, my childhood friend, reached out with a message. She had overheard Danielle in a cafe, bragging about a major investment, smiling as she said things were about to go her way. When pressed, she joked about me being out of the picture for a while. My hands trembled as I read the words. Out of the picture. That was what she wanted. A week later, Jim, a young orderly who wheeled me to therapy, whispered that he had seen Danielle late at night in the parking lot speaking to a man leaning against a black pickup with a crushed front bumper. The description made my skin crawl. That bumper. That truck. The driver had died in a so-called drunk accident days later. Too convenient. Too clean. Pieces began to click into place. Danielle had not only orchestrated the crash, she had erased the man who carried it out. I lay in that bed, weak, bruised, but inside me something hardened. She thought she had erased me. She thought I was powerless. But I was still breathing, still thinking, still fighting. The fear that once silenced me turned to fire in my chest. If she wanted me gone, then my survival would be the one thing she could not steal. And if she wanted to erase me, then I would come back louder, stronger, armed with the truth she never thought I could carry. That was the night I stopped waiting for my family. That was the night I decided I would not be erased. Days blurred together in the hospital machines, beeping fluorescent lights, buzzing my body a cage of pain and metal, but my mind sharpening with each hour I stayed alive. Danielle thought I was broken, thought I was erased, but the truth was that survival had turned into my rebellion. The shift came one morning when the door opened and my attorney, Mark Bennett, stepped in a leather briefcase in his hand, his face set with a grimness that told me everything before he spoke. He had helped me once before with the paperwork for my new house, a man I trusted enough to keep his card in my wallet. Now he pulled a folder from his case and slid it onto the tray table. "You need to see this," he said quietly, glancing at the door to make sure we were alone. Inside were photocopies, official stamps glaring back at me like scars. The first page was a petition filed by Danielle, requesting full guardianship over me on the grounds that I was incapacitated and unable to manage my affairs. Cold legal words described me as cognitively impaired, incapable of independence. My stomach twisted as I turned the page. The next document froze my breath. A death certificate. My name printed in black ink. Date of death listed as the night of the crash. Cause of death injuries sustained in a motor vehicle collision. Danielle had submitted it to the state lottery office, along with a notarized affidavit claiming she was my next of kin, the rightful heir to the winnings. My hands shook as I touched the paper. How could she erase me with ink, bury me before I had even left the hospital bed? Mark's voice cut through my disbelief. The bank accounts being frozen was no accident. Danielle provided them with the same certificate. She even tried to transfer the deed of your new house into her name, but the notary stamp did not match. My chest heaved, fury sparking hotter than pain. She had mapped it out step by step, my erasure written into official records. Not just control. Not just theft. Total annihilation of my existence. I pressed my hand to my forehead, the pounding in my skull matching the pounding of my heart. "What do we do?" Mark leaned closer. "We stop her, but we must be careful. Forged documents are serious, but proving intent is key. We need more evidence, witnesses, patterns. I suggest hiring a private investigator." His calm steadiness anchored me. For the first time since the crash, I felt a flicker of control return. I agreed, the decision searing itself into me. This was war, and I would not lie still. Within days, Mark introduced me to Luis Alvarez, a seasoned private investigator with eyes that missed nothing. He began trailing Danielle, digging into her meetings, her finances, her circle. At the same time, I prepared my own trap. With the help of the nurses, I hid a small camera in my hospital room. I wanted her face, her words, her arrogance recorded without denial. To bait her in, I asked Jenna to send Danielle a message from her phone. "Natalie is awake. She remembers everything. You should come before she talks." It was a risk, but I knew Danielle's instincts too well. She would not resist the chance to gauge my condition, maybe to push me into silence. 3 days later, I heard the sharp rhythm of her heels in the hallway. She entered my room with a bouquet of flowers, her smile painted on like a mask. "You look better than I expected," she said coolly, her eyes darting to the machines scanning my weakness. I asked why she had not visited earlier. She claimed she had been busy handling my affairs, her tone dripping with false concern. I mentioned the lottery office and the bank. Her expression flickered a crack in her mask. "Someone is filling your head with nonsense," she said, stepping closer. "You need rest, not rumors." I let the silence stretch, then asked if the rumors included a death certificate with my name on it. For a heartbeat, her mask shattered, then she recovered with a condescending smile. "You always did have an imagination, but the camera caught it. Every twitch, every lie." I pushed harder, told her my attorney had copies of the documents, that he was ready to take everything to court. Her lips parted in shock, then curved into fury. "You are making a mistake," she warned. "This could be handled quietly." I shook my head. "The time for quiet is over." She leaned in close, her voice low, venomous. "You were supposed to stay gone, Natalie. All you are doing now is making it worse for yourself." The words dripped like acid, but they were exactly what I needed. She left in a rush, heels clicking sharp against the tile, leaving the untouched bouquet on the table like an insult. I waited until the sound faded, then asked Carla to check the recording. It was perfect, every word captured. That evening, I sent the file to Mark. His reply came swiftly. "This is enough to bring her in, but let's give her more rope." I understood. Danielle was careful in public, but behind closed doors, her arrogance made her sloppy. The more we gathered, the tighter the noose would draw. Meanwhile, Luis returned with discoveries that chilled me. Danielle had withdrawn $10,000 in cash days before the crash. She had met multiple times with a man named Thomas Kerr, a freight manager whose company owned several trucks, including a black one with fresh front-end damage. Kerr was married to one of Danielle's closest friends. The driver of the truck that hit me was dead, a supposed drunk driving accident days later. Too neat. Too convenient. Witnesses said a friend of Kerr's kept him drinking all night before he crashed alone. Loose ends tied up with precision. Danielle had woven a conspiracy confident no one would see it. But now we had the map. The folder Luis handed me was heavy with proof, every page a weapon. I lay back against the pillows, the light in the room dim my body aching, but inside me the fire burned steady. She had tried to erase me, but all she had done was give me the ammunition to destroy her lies. The turning point had come. The next steps would not be about survival. They would be about justice. The day of the hearing arrived cold and gray, the kind of morning where the air felt heavy with anticipation, as though even the sky knew what was about to unfold. I traded my hospital gown for a black dress that draped carefully over my healing ribs. My hair pulled back, my crutches exchanged for a cane to project more strength than I truly felt. Every step still hurt, but every step also meant I had made it here alive, ready to face her. The courtroom was packed, the hum of conversation swelling, then dropping as people noticed me enter. Whispers rippled like a wave. "Isn't she supposed to be dead?" My cane clicked on the polished floor as I walked past rows of stunned faces, and when I reached our table, I let myself look up, locking eyes with Danielle. She sat at the plaintiff's table in her perfect navy suit, flipping through papers as though she still believed she was untouchable. Then she looked up and saw me. The transformation was instant. Her face went pale, her lips parted, her eyes widened in disbelief, the same scream clawing at her throat that had escaped when I first appeared alive. For a moment, she clutched the edge of the table, her knuckles white, her body trembling. Then she sank back in her chair, shaking her head as though denial could erase me once more. Judge Harmon entered the bailiff, called for order, and the gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the chamber. Proceedings began, and Mark rose with calm authority, his voice carrying steady and clear as he laid out the roadmap of betrayal. He spoke of the crash of the forged documents, of the suspicious financial moves, each word cutting deeper into the facade Danielle had built. Her attorney tried to object to paint it all as paranoia, but the judge overruled most protests, his eyes narrowing as the evidence stacked higher. Mark began presenting exhibits one by one. The first was the video from my hospital room. On the large monitor, Danielle appeared bouquet in hand, her mask of concern cracking as she admitted in a low, venomous voice. "You were supposed to stay gone, Natalie." Gasps swept across the room. Some leaned forward, others covered their mouths, eyes wide at the naked malice in her words. Danielle shifted in her seat, her face blotched with red, her composure slipping like sand through her fingers. Next came the forged death certificate. The black ink of my supposed death blazed on the screen, the official seal glaring under the fluorescent lights. A ripple of murmurs filled the room. The guardianship petition followed cold clinical words describing me as incapacitated, unfit to handle my affairs. My hands trembled as I looked at the screen, but I steadied myself. This was her trap, and now it was unraveling before everyone. Then came the quitclaim deed, the notary mismatch exposed with precision. The jury leaned forward, eyes flicking from document to Danielle, the picture becoming clear. Mark's voice never wavered. He moved on to the financial records, showing the $10,000 withdrawal, highlighting the timing in relation to meetings with Thomas Kerr. Luis took the stand calm and methodical, describing his investigation connecting Danielle to Kerr to the damaged black truck, the truck to the driver who conveniently died days later. His words drew a timeline as sharp as a knife, each link pulling the noose tighter. Carla, the nurse, testified next, recounting how Danielle had demanded records but never once asked about my condition. Her words dripped with disbelief at the coldness she had witnessed. Jenna followed her voice steady as she repeated Danielle's bragging in the cafe, her chilling words about me being out of the picture. Piece by piece, the net closed. By the time I was called to the stand, the weight of the evidence hung heavy in the room. I took the oath, steadied myself against the witness stand, and faced the jury. My voice shook once, but then it steadied. I told them about the night of the crash, the roar behind me, the deliberate shove that nearly killed me. I told them about waking in the hospital alone, abandoned my accounts, frozen, my name stamped dead on forged paper. I told them about the betrayal not just of a sister, but of parents who chose silence over truth. Every word carried the weight of months of pain, fear, and fire. Danielle's attorney tried to paint me as paranoid, suggesting the crash was coincidence, the documents clerical errors, but the evidence was too strong, the chain too precise. Mark played the final audio clip, Danielle's venomous whisper. "You were supposed to stay gone." The room fell silent, the truth undeniable. Danielle's face crumpled, her mask gone, her eyes wild as she realized there was no escape. She shook her head, stammering, her attorney's face tight with defeat. The judge called a brief recess, the gavel slamming as Danielle's body slumped, her breath ragged, a whimper escaping as she collapsed against the table. For the first time, fear flashed clear in her eyes. When court resumed, Judge Harmon's voice was iron. He recounted the charges, his words landing like hammer blows. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy, attempted misappropriation of assets. A criminal investigation into the crash would follow. The bailiff stepped forward. Danielle clutched the table nails, scraping wood, her eyes darting wildly, but it was over. The bailiff gripped her arms, pulled her to her feet. As the cuffs clicked shut around her wrists, she gasped, her head snapping toward me with a look that mingled rage and terror, but I did not look away. For once, I did not shrink, did not bend. I met her eyes, steady, unflinching, and in that moment she knew her empire of lies had collapsed. The murmurs in the courtroom swelled, people shaking their heads, whispering in disbelief at the depths of her betrayal. Some stared at me with pity, others with admiration, but I only felt the steady pulse of my heart, the throb in my leg, the fire in my chest. Justice was here. Danielle was led past me. Her hands bound her steps, stumbling. She hissed something under her breath, words lost under the weight of the room, but it did not matter. The game was over. As the doors closed behind her, the gavel fell one final time, sealing her fate. When the gavel fell for the last time and the courtroom emptied, I walked out into the cold afternoon light, my cane steady against the stone steps, the air sharp in my lungs but cleaner than it had ever felt. Danielle was gone, escorted in cuffs to a waiting car, her perfect mask shattered beyond repair, and with her collapse came the crumbling of the family that had once caged me. Reporters swarmed outside, shouting questions, flashes snapping in my face, but I moved past them with steady breath, knowing the story was already bigger than me, a story of betrayal, survival, and justice that would ripple beyond these courthouse walls. In the weeks that followed, Danielle was convicted of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Her sentencing carried the weight of attempted murder still under investigation, and every headline bore her name, not as the golden daughter, but as a fallen predator. My parents, once so blind to her cruelty, found themselves dragged into the glare of shame, their silence exposed as complicity, their community turning cold, as whispers spread about how they had chosen loyalty to Danielle over the life of their other daughter. They called me once a brief message full of excuses and half apologies, but I let it ring into silence. I owed them nothing. The weight of their disappointment was gone, and in its place was the strange lightness of freedom. My bank accounts were restored, the lottery winnings secured under my name, the deed to my house placed firmly back into my hands. Yet when I first stood on the porch of that small two-bedroom home, the sun dipping low across the fenced yard, I realized that money was only a tool, never the victory. The victory was standing there at all, breathing whole, unbroken. I hired a financial advisor who specialized in ethical investments, careful, steady, deliberate. I carved out a portion of the winnings for causes that mattered, organizations that sheltered victims of domestic abuse, foundations that supported survivors of violent crime, because I knew too well the silence and isolation they faced. Writing those first checks felt like reclaiming more than money. It felt like proof that the cycle of harm could be broken. I reached out to Jenna again, awkward at first. Our conversations brittle with the years Danielle had stolen from us, but slowly. Laughter returned to the easy kind we had shared as teenagers before everything was twisted. We met for coffee, we talked late into the night, and for the first time in years, I felt the fragile beginnings of trust returning. Trust would take time, but at least I wanted to try. The house became my sanctuary, filled with light that poured through the windows in the late afternoon, the quiet broken only by wind through the trees or the creak of the porch boards beneath my feet. Some nights I sat on the steps with a mug of tea, the cane resting beside me, and thought about how close I had come to disappearing entirely, how a forged death certificate and a single violent act could have erased me forever, if not for fragments of truth gathered like pieces of glass by those willing to stand with me. I realized survival was not just about living through the crash. It was about refusing to let Danielle define me in absence or in life. She had wanted me gone erased, forgotten, but instead I stood stronger, my voice louder, my story written into record for all to see. Family, I learned, can be both a shelter and a weapon, and when it becomes the latter, walking away is not betrayal. It is preservation. My parents had chosen silence. Danielle had chosen violence, but I chose survival. And in that choice, I found a freedom I had never known. On the day Danielle was sentenced, I sat once again in the courtroom, listening as the judge read her years of prison time, her empire of control dismantled piece by piece. She glanced back at me once, her eyes hollow, her lips trembling as though words still clung to her tongue, but I did not meet her gaze with hate. I met it with finality. Whatever power she had once wielded over me was gone. She was no longer my captor, no longer my shadow. She was simply another prisoner in a system she had tried to manipulate and lost. Walking out that day, I promised myself that my life from here would be mine in every sense, not defined by trauma, but shaped by choice. I would live not in fear, but in defiance of it. I would breathe without chains, love without approval, decide without apology. And as the sun dipped low across the sky, painting the horizon in fire, I understood that the greatest justice was not in seeing her led away in cuffs, though that image burned sweet in my memory. The greatest justice was surviving living well and turning every scar she gave me into proof that I could not be erased.